Hi everybody, this is Mr. Beaman here. Sorry I'm absent today, but since I'm not here, you're going to go ahead and watch this video. We're going to review the properties of multiplication so that later on, when we take the S back, you won't forget them. So we learned these in September at the beginning of the year. I wanted to kind of review them a little bit and then maybe add a little bit of little next level stuff so we can kind of try to use our third grade skills a little more. Now, you need to know the properties of multiplication and relationship between multiplication and division. There are five properties we've gone over: the commutative property, the associative property, the distributive property, the identity property, and the zero property. Let's go over the identity property first. So in the identity property, it states that any number, let's say 12, times 1 will always equal itself. So if you did 12 times 1, it'd equal 12. If you did 13 times 1, it would equal 13. That means it keeps its identity. 12 times 1 will always be 12. 13 times 1 will always be 13. 99 times 1 will always be 99. And it just keeps its identity, meaning it doesn't change. So multiplying by 1 does not change the number. Now what I'd like you to do, go ahead and answer a question about the identity property of multiplication. All right, the next property of multiplication I want to review is the zero property, which is very similar to the identity. It just states that anything times 0, let's say 23 times 0, will always equal 0. So whatever number you multiply by 0 will always be 0. So 112 times 0 will equal 0. Or 0 times 85 will always equal 0. Basically, it states that any number times 0 is always 0. So go ahead and answer a question using the zero property of multiplication. Hi, welcome back. Let's take a look at the next property of multiplication, which is the commutative property of multiplication. All right. Now that states that you can reverse numbers, the order of numbers when you multiply, and it will not change it. For instance, 2 times 5, which we know is 10, would be the same as 5 times 2, which we also know is 10. Meaning if you reverse the order, if you reverse these two orders, it does not change the answer. Just like 2 times 5 is 10, 5 times 2 is also 10. So for instance, let's do a bigger number. Let's say we had 13 times 8 equals, well, all I'd have to do is just reverse the order, and then I know that that also equals 8 times 13. So all you have to do is reverse the orders. Go ahead and answer a question using the commutative property of multiplication. Hi, welcome back. All right, here we go. And the next property I want to review, now we're getting into a little more complicated things. The associative property. Now that has to do with these things right here. Does anybody remember what these things are? For instance, if I had 2 times 3 times 5, and I use these things, let's see if you remember what these things are. These things right here. Go ahead and see if you remember. All right, those things are parentheses. Parentheses. Now, parentheses means you do first. So the associative property states that if you do 2 times 3 times 5 and you did 2 times 3 in parentheses, you can move the parentheses. So if I did 2 times 3 times 5 and I move the parentheses, it will not change the answer, because we know 2 times 3 is 5, and we know 5 times 5 is 25. Just like here, we know that 3 times 5 is, I'm sorry, 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 5 is 30, sorry. And 3 times 5 is 15, and 15 times 2 would be 30. So each of these sides equals 30. So moving the parentheses around does not change it. Now remember, if these operations right here have to be the same, all right? That also works for addition as well. But if they're different, if there's a multiply or divide in there, you do not use associative property. Go ahead and answer a question using the associative property of multiplication. All right, here we go. The next property of multiplication is the distributive property. That states that you can, if you multiply some numbers, let's say I had 3 times, let's go with 5 plus 1, and I have parentheses around that, I can distribute this 3 to the 5, this times 3, to the 5 and to the 1. So 3 times 5 plus 1 is the same as 3 times 5 plus 3 times 1. So if you solve that, 3 times 5 is 15. And plus 3 times 1, 3 times 1 is 3. And 15 plus 3 is 18. So if you look here, if you know this, 5 plus 1 is 6. And does everybody agree 3 times 6 is also 18? So that states that you can distribute the 3, or distribute whatever number this is, to each of the other numbers and then add them up. Now this comes in handy when you have big numbers. And for instance, let's say I had 3 times 15. And I wanted to use the distributive property, and I didn't know the answer. I could break apart this 15. So if I broke apart this 15, I know that that 15 is the same as 10 plus 5. Now if I wanted to multiply that by 3, I can put those in parentheses, do the times 3. Then all I have to do is distribute my 3, distribute my times 3 to the 5, and then to the 10, and then add them up. So I know that 3 times 5, 3 times 5, plus 3 times 10 would be 15 plus 30, which equals 45. All right? Just like I know 3 times 15 is 15 plus 15 plus 15, which also equals 45. Go ahead and answer a question using the distributive property. Okay, now I would like you to go back into Schoology, and I would like you to go and take the quiz on the different properties of multiplication. Now remember, we have the distributive property, where you distribute the times to the different numbers. We have the associative property, where you can move around the parentheses and it doesn't change the answer. We have the commutative property, where you can swap the order. You can swap the order of the numbers and it will not change the answer. We have the zero property, which just states multiply anything times 0, you get 0. And identity property just states that if you multiply by 1, you get the same number. Again, here's the 5 different types of multiplication properties. I'd like you to go back on Schoology and take the quiz. If you score a 70% or above, I would like you to get on your Zern lessons. But if you score below a 70 on it, there's an extra activity I would like you to do underneath. Have a good day.